A Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, an imposing American warplane, found itself unexpectedly grounded in a verdant French field during the autumn months of 1943. While its formidable propeller was twisted out of shape and its landing gear had buckled under the impact, the aircraft remained remarkably intact, a testament to its robust construction. Its pilot, having successfully executed a low-level strafing run, had subsequently bailed out, leaving this monumental 7-ton marvel of American engineering to fall into the hands of the German Luftwaffe. Within mere hours of its discovery, German recovery teams descended upon the crash site with an almost archaeological fervor, meticulously examining what appeared to them as an extraterrestrial artifact. While the Luftwaffe had previously encountered numerous downed Allied aircraft, including agile Spitfires, sleek P-38 Lightnings, and even the occasional resilient B-17 Flying Fortress, the Thunderbolt presented a stark departure. Its sheer scale was astonishing, almost grotesquely heavy for a single-engine fighter, and its formidable reputation among Luftwaffe pilots had already blossomed into something bordering on legend. The subsequent recovery operation itself demanded a delicate touch, reflecting the aircraft's complex nature and strategic value. German mechanics, with painstaking precision, systematically dismantled the major components, carefully loading them onto waiting flatbed trucks. This precious cargo was then transported to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's principal testing facility, situated approximately 60 miles north of Berlin. Rechlin was far more than a mere airfield. It functioned as the very nerve center of German aviation intelligence, a place where captured enemy aircraft underwent exhaustive and meticulous analysis. By late 1943, the facility had evolved into a truly bizarre museum of Allied air power, its hangars housing American, British, and Soviet aircraft standing side by side with cutting-edge German prototypes, creating an almost surreal tableau of the air war's competing philosophies and technological ambitions. We hope you are enjoying this deep dive into aviation history. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video for more fascinating details. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Also, we encourage you to write a comment below, sharing where you are from and what you think about this intriguing topic. The arrival of the P-47 at Rechlin ignited an immediate surge of excitement among the technical staff and seasoned test pilots. For months, disquieting reports had been filtering in from the Western Front, painting a perplexing picture. Luftwaffe pilots consistently claimed that American fighters, particularly these formidable Thunderbolts, possessed an uncanny ability to absorb a degree of punishment that would unequivocally obliterate a Messerschmitt Bf 109 or a Focke-Wulf FW-190. Pilots recounted instances of emptying entire ammunition loads into P-47s during intense aerial combat, witnessing their cannon shells strike home with undeniable impact, only to observe the American fighter continuing its flight as if utterly impervious to damage. Such baffling resilience led to a spectrum of theories among the German airmen and intelligence officers. Some pilots began to suspect that their ammunition was defective, questioning its efficacy against the robust American designs. Others pondered whether American metallurgy had somehow achieved a technological leap far beyond German capabilities. The more superstitious types whispered about the possibility that the Americans had developed some form of advanced force field technology. German intelligence officers, however, required concrete answers. The Eastern Front was relentlessly consuming resources at an astronomical rate, and the Luftwaffe could ill afford to squander precious ammunition on aircraft that appeared immune to its effects. If the P-47 truly harbored some revolutionary defensive technology, Germany needed to comprehend it, replicate it, or devise effective countermeasures. The captured Thunderbolt, therefore, represented an unparalleled opportunity to unravel this profound mystery through direct examination, rather than relying on speculative battlefield accounts. What rendered this particular aircraft especially invaluable was its remarkably preserved condition. Unlike the majority of captured planes, which typically arrived as twisted wreckage demanding extensive and arduous reconstruction, this P-47 required only relatively minor repairs to be rendered airworthy once more. The engine remained intact, the airframe exhibited no significant structural damage, and most of the internal systems appeared to be fully functional. German mechanics optimistically estimated that they could have it airborne within a matter of weeks. Crucially, its pristine state meant they could subject it to the kind of destructive testing that would definitively reveal precisely why these aircraft consistently survive combat damage that, by all conventional understanding, should have proven fatal. The stage was thus meticulously set for one of the most revealing and strategically significant aircraft evaluations of the entire war. The P-47 Thunderbolt was undeniably not conceived with aesthetic beauty in mind, nor was it ever intended to be a lightweight fighter. When Republic Aviation's design team convened in 1940 to conceptualize a fighter built around the colossal Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, they made a pivotal and conscious decision that would fundamentally define every aspect of the aircraft. Survivability would unequivocally take precedence over elegance and agility. The R2800 itself was an absolute behemoth, an 18-cylinder radial engine initially capable of producing 2,000 horsepower, a figure later boosted to an astounding 2,500 horsepower in some subsequent variants. To contextualize this power, the venerable Bf-109G typically produced approximately 1,475 horsepower, and even the formidable FW-190 topped out around 1,700 horsepower. The Thunderbolt, therefore, commanded a raw power output that German fighters simply could not rival. However, all that prodigious power inevitably came with significant consequences. The P-47D, which emerged as the most ubiquitous variant, tipped the scales at an approximate 10,000 pounds when empty, and could reach a staggering 17,500 pounds when fully loaded with fuel, ammunition, and ordnance. This made it roughly twice as heavy as a Messerschmitt Bf-109. German engineers, meticulously examining the captured aircraft, expressed profound disbelief that a single-engine fighter could be so extraordinarily heavy and yet function with such apparent effectiveness. Their own design philosophy vehemently emphasized lightweight construction and inherent agility, prioritizing the ability to outturn an opponent in a close-quarters dogfight. The Americans, it appeared, had adopted the diametrically opposite approach, constructing what was essentially a flying tank. A substantial portion of the Thunderbolt's immense size stemmed directly from its sophisticated turbocharger system. Unlike German fighters that typically employed mechanically driven superchargers mounted directly onto the engine, the P-47 utilized a massive General Electric turbocharger strategically located in the rear fuselage. Hot exhaust gases, expelled from the engine, spun a turbine that, in turn, drove a compressor. This compressor then forced highly compressed air into the engine at high altitudes, where the thin atmosphere would otherwise starve it of vital oxygen. This intricate system necessitated extensive ducting, a complex network of pipes that traversed the entire length of the fuselage, carrying superheated exhaust gases backward and compressed air forward. The engineering was undeniably complex, inherently heavy, and somewhat prone to leaks, but it endowed the Thunderbolt with phenomenal high-altitude performance. At 30,000 feet, where Bf-109s and FW-190s struggled for air and experienced significant power loss, The P-47 continued to produce its maximum horsepower with unwavering efficiency. The fuselage itself was engineered with the resilience of a fortress. Republic's engineers had meticulously studied combat damage reports from early war fighters and arrived at a crucial conclusion: most fatal hits occurred in predictable and vulnerable locations, specifically the engine, the cockpit, and the fuel system. Consequently, they armored virtually everything. The pilot was ensconced behind a quarter-inch thick steel plate integrated into his seat back and protected by bulletproof glass positioned directly in front of him. Additional armor plates shielded the engine from frontal attacks. The fuel tanks incorporated a truly revolutionary self-sealing design, multiple layers of rubber that would swell and effectively close bullet holes upon exposure to fuel. While this innovative technology existed in some British aircraft, the Americans had refined it to an exceptionally high degree of effectiveness. Beyond the armor and robust construction, there was the sheer redundancy deliberately built into every critical system. The P-47 featured multiple fuel pumps, ensuring continued operation even if one failed. Backup electrical systems provided an alternative power source, and crucial control cables were routed through different sections of the airframe, making it highly improbable that a single cannon hit could sever them all simultaneously. Even the cooling system for that enormous engine was distributed across a large surface area, meaning localized damage would not precipitate immediate overheating. German fighters, designed with an unwavering focus on minimum weight and maximum performance, possessed no such redundancy. A single precisely aimed 20mm shell in the right location could effectively destroy a Bf-109's cooling system, inevitably forcing the pilot to shut down the engine within minutes or risk catastrophic failure. While the German technicians at Rechlin certainly understood the basic specifications of the Thunderbolt even before commencing their detailed evaluation, comprehending numbers on paper and experiencing the aircraft firsthand were two entirely distinct propositions. Rechlin was not simply assigning random pilots to captured aircraft. The Luftwaffe maintained a highly specialized unit known as Circus Rosarius, named after its charismatic commander, Theodore Rosarius, specifically tasked with the comprehensive evaluation of enemy equipment. By 1943, this unit had evolved into one of the most elite groups within the Luftwaffe, staffed by hardened combat veterans who possessed a profound understanding not just of how to fly, but crucially, how to analyze an aircraft's intrinsic strengths and weaknesses from a pragmatic operational perspective. These were not test pilots in the peacetime sense. They were seasoned warriors who had survived hundreds of combat missions and could immediately discern whether a particular design feature would genuinely matter in the crucible of actual battle. Among the distinguished aces selected for the critical P-47 evaluation was Hermann Graf. By late 1943, Graf had accumulated an astonishing record of over 200 confirmed kills on the Eastern Front, solidifying his status as one of Germany's most successful fighter pilots. He had piloted virtually every type of fighter, from the early Bf-109E models to the very latest FW-190A8s, endowing him with an encyclopedic understanding of fighter aircraft handling characteristics and combat performance. The Luftwaffe specifically sought pilots of Graf's caliber because they would not be easily impressed by mere novelty or intimidated by foreign technology. They would evaluate the Thunderbolt with the same cold, methodical detachment they applied to assessing a potential opponent in combat, relentlessly searching for vulnerabilities to exploit. Alongside Graf, several other highly experienced pilots rotated through Rechlin for the rigorous evaluation. Hans Werner Lurk, another decorated pilot, dedicated considerable time to thoroughly assessing captured Allied aircraft, and would later extensively document his invaluable experiences. These men understood implicitly that their meticulously compiled reports possessed the potential to influence Luftwaffe tactics across the entire Western Front. If they uncovered a critical weakness in the P-47, perhaps an inability to turn tightly at low speed, or specific blind spots in the cockpit, that vital information would be rapidly disseminated to fighter squadrons within days. Conversely, if their evaluations confirmed that the Thunderbolt was indeed as tough and resilient as frontline pilots claimed, the Luftwaffe would be compelled to fundamentally adjust its entire approach to engaging American fighter escorts, necessitating a paradigm shift in combat strategy. The methodical assessment of American fighter escorts at the Rechlin facility adhered to a stringent protocol. Initially, aviators meticulously performed walk-around inspections, scrutinizing the aircraft's structural integrity, formidable weaponry, and intricate systems. Their scrutiny extended to the cockpit's arrangement, diligently noting the placement of crucial controls by American designers, and comparing the field of vision to that offered by German fighter aircraft. Following this, ground engine runs were executed to fully comprehend the power plant's operational characteristics. Only after this comprehensive preliminary appraisal would flight testing be attempted, and even then, it progressed with a measured pace, commencing with brief excursions around the airfield, then progressively expanding to include sophisticated aerobatic maneuvers, exhilarating high-speed dives, and simulated combat scenarios. Every facet of this extensive operation was fastidiously documented. German technical personnel assiduously photographed each minute detail, recorded precise measurements, and compiled exhaustive technical reports intended for dissemination among aircraft manufacturers and the high command of the Luftwaffe. Their objective transcended a mere understanding of a single captured P-47. They aimed to grasp the overarching philosophy of American design. The pressing questions were clear. What valuable insights could German engineers glean from this formidable aircraft? Were there particular features worthy of emulation? Conversely, were there inherent flaws that could be strategically exploited in future aerial engagements? An underlying psychological dimension permeated these evaluations. On occasion, the Luftwaffe strategically deployed captured aircraft in combat, emblazoned with distinct German insignia, flying them against Allied formations to sow confusion and discord. The sudden appearance of a P-47, conspicuously adorned with Luftwaffe markings, in an unexpected location at a critical juncture, possessed the potential to induce momentary hesitation among American pilots, a pause that, in the unforgiving realm of aerial combat, frequently proved fatal. However, the efficacy of such a stratagem was entirely contingent upon German pilots possessing an exhaustive understanding of how to operate the captured aircraft with sufficient conviction to convincingly masquerade as American aviators, at least from a distance, ensuring the deception held. As the dedicated Rechlin team meticulously prepared for their inaugural flights in the formidable Thunderbolt, they carried with them the cumulative wisdom derived from hundreds of aerial engagements and an intense, burning curiosity regarding whether this colossal American fighter could genuinely fulfill the burgeoning reputation preceding it. We sincerely invite you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this fascinating video. Your likes and subscriptions are greatly appreciated. Please share in the comments where you are from and your thoughts on this intriguing topic. Hermann Graf, upon squeezing himself into the P-47's cockpit, instantly comprehended the necessity for American pilots to possess a reasonably tall stature. The cockpit, while not exhibiting a claustrophobic confinement, surprisingly offered a greater internal volume than a Bf-109. However, every control and instrument was positioned to accommodate a pilot with longer limbs than the typical German aviator. The rudder pedals were situated remarkably far forward, The control stick ascended from the floor at an unfamiliar angle, and the instrument panel seemed to recede into the distance. In stark contrast to German fighters, which often enveloped their pilots akin to custom-tailored garments, the Thunderbolt conveyed the sensation of occupying a small, expansive room. The panoramic visibility afforded by the P-47 was nothing short of revolutionary. The aircraft's distinctive bubble canopy, a pivotal innovation introduced on the D model, provided an almost unobstructed 360-degree vista, rendering the heavily framed canopy of the Bf-109 akin to peering through a narrow letterbox aperture. Graf found he could effortlessly glance directly behind himself without physical strain, could survey the skies above and below with minimal head movement, and enjoyed an unimpeded view of both wingtips. In the crucible of combat, such an advantage would be immeasurable. Luftwaffe pilots had painfully learned that the majority of successful kills originated from attacks the victim never perceived. The P-47's advanced canopy design significantly diminished the likelihood of achieving surprise attacks. Initially, the instrument layout presented a considerable challenge to the German pilots. American designers had adopted an entirely disparate arrangement. Airspeed was measured in miles per hour rather than kilometers, altitude in feet instead of meters, and a perplexing array of gauges monitored systems that simply did not exist in German fighter aircraft. There were multiple selectors for fuel tanks, a testament to the P-47's capacity to carry fuel within its fuselage, wings, and even external drop tanks. A sophisticated turbocharger control system, complete with regulators and pressure gauges, added to the complexity. The electrical panel alone boasted more switches than the entire cockpit of a Bf-109E. It consumed several hours for Graf and his fellow aviators merely to decipher the function of each component, and even longer to commit the intricate startup sequence to memory. The armament switch panel eloquently revealed another fundamental tenet of American design philosophy: overwhelming firepower. The P-47D was equipped with 8 formidable Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, meticulously integrated into each wing, each supplied with approximately 425 rounds. This translated to an astonishing total of approximately 3,400 rounds. In comparison, the FW-190A8 typically carried 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns, with a significantly reduced total ammunition capacity. The American strategy emphasized a prodigious volume of fire, aiming to create a dense, inescapable cone of bullets that rendered evasion almost impossible. The German approach, conversely, prioritized hitting power, fewer shots, but each one possessing the potential for catastrophic damage. Neither philosophy was inherently superior. They merely represented divergent tactical doctrines. What surprised Graf most profoundly was the aircraft's exceptional comfort. The pilot's seat was generously padded, the cockpit was efficiently heated, and there was even the thoughtful inclusion of a relief tube for extended missions, a seemingly minor detail that became profoundly significant on arduous 4-hour escort missions to destinations like Berlin and back. German fighters were primarily engineered for brief, intense interception sorties, rarely remaining airborne for more than 90 minutes. The P-47, by contrast, was unequivocally designed for marathon missions, with ergonomics that prioritized pilot endurance over the pursuit of minimal weight. The control stick itself featured integrated electric trim switches within its grip, empowering the pilot to adjust the aircraft's balance without the need to reach for separate trim wheels. This might appear to be a trivial convenience, but in the heat of combat, maintaining one hand on the throttle and the other firmly on the stick at all times could spell the crucial difference between survival and demise. The oxygen system presented yet another remarkable revelation. It employed a demand regulator that automatically modulated oxygen flow based on altitude, a stark contrast to German systems, which necessitated manual adjustments. Again, this was a seemingly minor detail, but one that significantly diminished pilot workload amidst the chaotic environment of high-altitude combat. It was evident that American engineers had meticulously considered every aspect of the pilot's experience, striving to make the aircraft as intuitively flyable as possible, thereby allowing the pilot to concentrate fully on fighting rather than on managing complex systems. Graf had not even initiated the engine, and already the Thunderbolt was fundamentally challenging his preconceived notions about fighter design. The formidable R-2800 double wasp engine roared to life, with a deep, resonant bellow that was distinctly different from the high-pitched shriek characteristic of a Daimler-Benz inline engine. Graf allowed it to reach optimal operating temperature in strict adherence to the checklist meticulously translated by mechanics from captured American manuals, diligently monitoring the cylinder head temperature gauges as they ascended into their designated green arcs. The entire aircraft vibrated with a palpable, barely contained power, and he had not yet even advanced the throttle. When he finally disengaged the brakes and began to taxi towards the runway, the sheer weight of the P-47 became immediately apparent. It did not gracefully dance across the ground like a Bf-109. Instead, it lumbered, necessitating heavy applications of the brakes to regulate speed and aggressive bursts of throttle to initiate movement from a standstill. The takeoff roll proved to be considerably longer than Graf had anticipated, even with the immense power of its engine. The Thunderbolt accelerated steadily, but not explosively, its substantial mass demanding more runway than any single-engine fighter he had previously commanded. At approximately 100 miles per hour, he gently eased back on the stick, and the P-47 lifted off smoothly, ascending from Rechlin with a remarkable stability that almost conveyed the sensation of piloting a bomber. There was none of the inherent twitchiness of a Bf-109, no tendency to swing on takeoff, unlike the torquey FW-190. The Thunderbolt simply flew with a profound solidity and predictability. At altitude, the dynamics underwent a profound transformation. Graf leveled off at 25,000 feet and commenced a thorough evaluation of the aircraft's handling characteristics. The controls were noticeably heavier than those of German fighters. The ailerons demanded genuine physical exertion to manipulate at high speeds, and the elevator felt as though it were moving through thick molasses compared to the light, precise touch required in a Bf-109. Yet, there was an undeniable precision inherent in that heaviness. When Graf commanded a turn, the P-47 responded with the exact degree of movement he desired, then ceased with no overcorrection, no disconcerting bobbling. It exhibited a stability so profound it almost felt reluctant to maneuver, but that very stability would prove invaluable as a stable gun platform. German pilots frequently struggled to maintain their aim during high-speed attacks due to the inherent sensitivity of their fighters. The Thunderbolt's heavy controls, however, would steadfastly keep the gun sight locked onto its target. Then, Graf pushed the nose down and fully opened the throttle. This was the crucible where the Thunderbolt's formidable reputation was forged, and the German pilots desperately needed to ascertain the veracity of the stories. The airspeed indicator rapidly ascended, 300 miles per hour, 350, 400, 450. The aircraft remained utterly rock-solid, no buffeting, no tendency to tuck or inadvertently pull itself into a steeper dive. At 500 mph, speeds that would induce control surface flutter and structural integrity concerns in most German fighters, the P-47 still felt remarkably controllable. Graf pulled back on the stick to recover, and the Thunderbolt seamlessly converted its incredible dive speed into a soaring climb that propelled him back up several thousand feet in mere seconds. This, unequivocally, was the Thunderbolt's decisive advantage. In combat, a diving attack followed by a swift zoom climb represented the safest and most effective fighter tactic. The attacker would plunge towards their target with immense speed, unleash a rapid burst of fire, then capitalize on that speed to rapidly ascend back to altitude before any retaliation could be mounted. The P-47 possessed the capacity to dive faster than any aircraft the Luftwaffe fielded, and could sustain those blistering speeds for longer durations. A Bf-109 pilot attempting to pursue a diving Thunderbolt would be compelled either to disengage from the pursuit or risk exceeding his aircraft's structural limitations. And if a German pilot did manage to somehow intercept a P-47, the American aviator could simply advance the throttle and extend away, utilizing superior speed to effortlessly break contact. The initial assessment of the captured P-47 Thunderbolt focused on its aerial maneuverability, revealing a stark contrast between its straight-line speed and its turning capabilities. While the aircraft demonstrated an impressive capacity for achieving superior speeds, allowing it to disengage from combat at will, its performance in tight, sustained turns proved to be a significant limitation. When Graf, a seasoned pilot, executed a sharp turn at a moderate altitude, he immediately perceived the Thunderbolt's inherent deficiency in this aspect. The P-47 responded to the control inputs, yet its turning radius was notably wide, causing a rapid dissipation of kinetic energy during prolonged circling engagements. This characteristic meant that a German fighter, such as a Bf-109 or FW-190, could readily outmaneuver the Thunderbolt in a classic dogfight scenario, gaining a tactical advantage and positioning itself for an offensive strike if the aerial combat devolved into a close-quarters turning battle. However, Graf's astute observation led him to a crucial realization. American pilots, understanding these inherent strengths and weaknesses, would likely never permit such a situation to unfold. Given the Thunderbolt's undeniable superiority in speed, its remarkable ability to perform at higher altitudes, and its potent zoom climb capabilities, P-47 pilots possessed the strategic advantage of dictating the terms of any engagement. They could judiciously select the opportune moments for initiating combat and, critically, for breaking contact, thereby compelling their German adversaries to fight on conditions that favor the American aircraft's design philosophy. The exhaustive evaluation flights persisted over a span of several days, during which diverse pilots meticulously explored the full spectrum of the Thunderbolt's operational envelope. A clear consensus quickly materialized among the testers. This particular aircraft was not, by conventional European standards, a traditional dogfighter. Its design did not emphasize the intricate, close-range maneuvering typical of many contemporary fighters. Nevertheless, it was unequivocally recognized as a devastatingly effective combat platform when its inherent strengths were leveraged appropriately. This understanding solidified the notion that the P-47, despite its perceived limitations in certain areas, was a formidable adversary in the right hands and under the right tactical applications. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. While the intensive flight testing successfully elucidated many aspects of the Thunderbolt's performance, it left one of the most perplexing enigmas unresolved: the astonishing resilience of these aircraft to battle damage that, by all logical expectations, should have rendered them completely inoperable. Luftwaffe pilots were not merely fabricating these accounts. Photographic evidence from gun cameras vividly depicted 20mm cannon shells directly impacting P-47s, resulting in unmistakable explosions upon contact. Yet, with uncanny persistence, these American fighters continued their flight. Instances were documented where aircraft returned to their airfields riddled with dozens of perforations, their control surfaces visibly shredded, and their engines sustaining significant damage, only to be repaired and flown again on the subsequent day. German intelligence urgently needed to ascertain whether this remarkable durability was attributable to sheer luck, a testament to superior construction methodologies, or the incorporation of a specific design feature that could potentially be counteracted. The Rechlin team, therefore, opted for a pragmatic and direct investigative approach. They would subject the captured P-47 to direct fire from their own weaponry and meticulously scrutinize the precise effects of these impacts. This methodology was not without precedent. The Luftwaffe had previously conducted similar weapons effectiveness tests on captured aircraft, typically by securing the target aircraft to a static stand and engaging it with fire from various angles to assess vulnerability. However, the planned P-47 test was conceived to be far more exhaustive and granular in its scope. The objective was to fire directly at the aircraft's most critical systems, specifically the engine, the fuel tanks, the control surfaces, and the cockpit area, and systematically document the extent of damage the aircraft could withstand before it became definitively unflyable. The primary weapon designated for this rigorous testing was the MG-151-20, the standard 20mm cannon that had become ubiquitous in the majority of Luftwaffe fighters by 1943. This potent weapon discharged a 115-gram high-explosive incendiary shell at an approximate muzzle velocity of 720 meters per second. In the context of actual aerial combat, a single, precisely aimed hit from an MG-151-20 possessed the destructive potential to incapacitate vital components, sever crucial control cables, or ignite volatile fuel tanks. Most German pilots held the conviction that 3 to 5 solid hits from this cannon were typically sufficient to bring down any Allied fighter. The FW-190A8, for instance, was equipped with 4 such cannons, endowing it with formidable offensive firepower, albeit with a constrained ammunition supply, approximately 250 rounds in total across all 4 weapons, equating to roughly 5 seconds of continuous firing. The meticulous arrangement for the test required exhaustive planning. German engineers carefully positioned the P-47 on the designated Rechlin firing range, securing it firmly to prevent any unintended movement while ensuring that all its systems remained fully accessible for subsequent post-test inspection. Crucially, the fuel tanks were filled with genuine aviation fuel to accurately evaluate the efficacy of the self-sealing technology under conditions mirroring real-world combat scenarios. The cockpit area was comprehensively instrumented with an array of pressure sensors and high-speed cameras, designed to meticulously record the precise events unfolding as rounds traversed the pilot's compartment. They even went so far as to install a sophisticated dummy in the pilot's seat, strategically positioned behind the robust armor plate, to determine the actual protective capabilities of the aircraft's defensive systems. Several MG-151-20 cannons were strategically mounted at various positions around the aircraft, painstakingly calibrated to simulate a diverse range of attack angles. In authentic combat situations, fighter aircraft rarely engaged from perfectly perpendicular trajectories. The overwhelming majority of attacks originated from the rear quarter, typically from a slightly elevated or depressed position, as the attacking pilot endeavored to close the distance into optimal firing range while simultaneously evading any defensive fire from the target. The test protocols were meticulously designed to replicate these realistic angles, firing at the engine from a shallow angle, mirroring a characteristic pursuit attack, striking the wings from the side to assess the vulnerability of the fuel tanks, and impacting the tail section to observe how the intricate control systems reacted to battle damage. The selection of ammunition was also a critical consideration. German 20mm rounds were manufactured in several distinct varieties, armor-piercing projectiles specifically engineered for engaging heavily armored bombers, high-explosive incendiary rounds optimized for combat against agile fighters, and mixed belts that judiciously alternated between these different types. The test would exclusively utilize combat-loaded ammunition, precisely the same mix that Luftwaffe pilots carried on their actual operational missions. This included the highly destructive Meningeskos rounds, thin-walled shells packed with a significantly greater quantity of explosive material than conventional cannon ammunition. These particular rounds were notoriously effective against aircraft, possessing the capability to inflict catastrophic damage with just a single, well-placed hit. A diverse assembly of observers from across the Luftwaffe's various technical branches gathered to witness this pivotal test. This undertaking transcended mere academic curiosity. If the P-47 demonstrated specific vulnerabilities to particular attack methodologies, that invaluable intelligence would be immediately disseminated and integrated into tactical doctrine. Conversely, if the aircraft proved remarkably resistant, the Luftwaffe might be compelled to develop novel ammunition types or devise entirely new combat tactics to effectively counter it. There was also a palpable concern regarding resource allocation. Germany was already grappling with immense strain to produce a sufficient quantity of aircraft and ammunition to sustain operations on multiple fronts. If the current arsenal of weapons proved ineffectual against American heavy fighters, the Reich simply could not afford the continued expenditure of precious ammunition on attacks that failed to yield decisive results. With the cannons meticulously loaded and all measuring equipment meticulously verified for functionality, the test crew prepared to definitively answer whether the P-47 Thunderbolt was, in fact, as seemingly indestructible as its reputation suggested. The initial cannon shot reverberated with a sharp, resonant crack that echoed across the expansive Rechlin test range, propelling a 20mm shell directly into the P-47's engine cowling. The impact was instantaneous. A vivid flash of orange as the high-explosive round detonated, immediately followed by the appearance of a distinct hole punched clean through the metal. The assembled observers carefully documented the results and braced themselves for the subsequent shot. This was not conceived as a single-bullet examination. The intention was to subject the Thunderbolt to the kind of sustained and concentrated fire it might realistically encounter during an actual combat engagement, emptying multiple cannon magazines into its most critical areas to meticulously simulate a determined and skilled attack by an experienced pilot. More rounds relentlessly slammed into the engine section, each originating from a different angle. Every impact generated a unique pattern of damage. Some projectiles cleanly perforated the structure, leaving distinct entry and exit holes, while others detonated internally within components, unleashing fragmentation damage that radiated outward from the point of impact. The formidable R-2800 engine absorbed hit after devastating hit. Cylinders cracked under the force, cooling fins shattered into fragments, and substantial chunks of the cylinder head broke away. The accessory section, the area where critical components such as generators and hydraulic pumps were mounted to the engine, sustained several direct hits. By any conventional metric, this engine should have been utterly annihilated, rendered completely inoperable, a total and irrecoverable loss. The German gunners then meticulously shifted their aim towards the wings, specifically targeting the fuel tanks. This was the juncture where the observers anticipated truly catastrophic results. Aviation fuel is inherently volatile, and the 20mm high-explosive incendiary rounds were expressly engineered to ignite fuel tanks. A single, accurately placed hit on an unprotected tank was expected to transform an aircraft into a raging fireball. The Luftwaffe had witnessed countless Allied aircraft erupting in midair after a fortunate cannon hit found its mark on a fuel tank. The P-47 was equipped with multiple tanks strategically located within both its wings and fuselage, boasting a substantial total capacity exceeding 300 gallons. One well-aimed hit, it was widely believed, should unequivocally incinerate the aircraft. The first 20mm round struck the left wing tank with pinpoint accuracy, dead center. The observers fully expected a dramatic explosion or, at the very least, visible flames. Instead, they witnessed fuel spraying from both the entry and exit holes, creating a fleeting mist in the air, and then nothing. There was no fire, no explosion. The fuel simply leaked out and began to pool on the ground directly beneath the wing. The gunners fired again and again, punching numerous additional holes through the wing tanks from various angles. Each time, fuel continued to leak out, yet there was no ignition whatsoever. The self-sealing technology was clearly functioning with remarkable efficacy, but, even more impressively, the high-explosive rounds were evidently failing to create the requisite fuel-air mixture necessary for combustion. The tanks were apparently engineered with such robust internal structure that even explosive cannon shells could not inflict the catastrophic damage required to ignite the contained fuel. Attention subsequently shifted to the cockpit area. German fighters, by comparison, possessed minimal armor protection, and a 20mm hit anywhere in the vicinity of the pilot's position was typically considered fatal. The P-47's substantial armor plate, positioned directly behind the pilot's seat, was primarily designed to withstand rifle-caliber rounds and shell fragments. However, a critical question remained. Could it effectively stop a direct hit from a potent 20mm cannon? The unequivocal answer was no. A direct, perpendicular hit on the armor plate would indeed result in penetration. Yet, the test unveiled a more intriguing and significant detail. The armor was strategically positioned and angled in such a manner that a direct, perfectly perpendicular hit was rendered exceedingly improbable in a combat scenario. The majority of rounds struck at oblique angles, and even when they managed to penetrate, the armor's design effectively deflected them sufficiently, ensuring that the dummy occupying the pilot's seat remained comparatively protected from the most severe effects of the impact. The pilot's cockpit, surprisingly, maintained a remarkable degree of integrity and protection throughout the simulated assault. Despite the torrent of incoming fire, the critical area where the aviator would be seated was largely shielded from the most devastating impacts, suggesting a deliberate design consideration for occupant safety. This initial observation hinted at a robust structural integrity that would become a recurring theme in the subsequent analysis of the aircraft's resilience, an early indication of its extraordinary toughness. Following the initial onslaught, the aircraft's aft fuselage, specifically its crucial tail section, became the target of intense and destructive bombardment. Vital control cables, the intricate network of hydraulic lines, and the very structural framework that meticulously anchored the empennage to the main fuselage were all subjected to direct, punishing impacts. The rudder, essential for directional control, was utterly decimated, its surfaces torn and fragmented. Similarly, the elevator, which governs pitch, bore the marks of numerous perforations, rendering its aerodynamic profile severely compromised. The vertical stabilizer, providing yaw stability, presented an appearance akin to having been savagely ravaged by an enormous cheese grater, its surface riddled with countless lacerations. Such extensive defacement to these critical control surfaces would, under normal circumstances, inevitably render almost any other aircraft completely inoperable. For an aircraft to maintain controlled flight, its aerodynamic surfaces demand an unblemished and uniform integrity. Even the slightest impairment to their smooth contours is typically sufficient to severely undermine the pilot's capacity to command the machine, a vulnerability magnified exponentially at higher velocities, where intense aerodynamic pressures accentuate every structural flaw. After a sustained barrage, during which approximately 50 lethal 20mm rounds had been methodically discharged into numerous critical and non-critical sections of the aircraft's anatomy, the gunnery teams finally brought their relentless assault to a halt. The air on the test range, thick with the acrid scent of propellant and the faint wisps of smoke emanating from smoldering internal components, gradually began to clear. Yet, despite the ferocity of the attack, there was no cataclysmic explosion, no inferno of raging flames, and none of the definitive visual cues typically associated with a combat kill. The P-47, though visibly battered and perforated with countless holes, stubbornly remained structurally cohesive and remarkably intact. Its survival, even in this static state, was an anomaly. Now, we kindly ask you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this fascinating video. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment below, letting us know where you are from and what your thoughts are on this compelling topic. The true crucible for assessing the aircraft's extraordinary resilience would, however, manifest itself during the meticulous post-firing inspection. This crucial phase would permit the dedicated team of engineers to conduct an exhaustive, close-quarter examination, precisely identifying which components had defied destruction and which had succumbed to the destructive force of the projectiles. The anticipation of this detailed analysis hung heavy in the air, as it promised to reveal the underlying secrets of the P-47's remarkable ability to withstand such a concentrated onslaught, moving beyond mere superficial observation to a deep understanding of its engineering philosophy. The specialized inspection team, armed with their clipboards for detailed notes, cameras to document every instance of damage, and an undeniable undercurrent of professional disbelief, cautiously approached the P-47, now a veritable sieve of bullet holes. From a superficial vantage point, even from a moderate distance, the sheer extent of the devastation suggested an irreparable wreck, an airframe that could, by all conventional wisdom, never again achieve flight. The visual evidence presented a stark picture of an aircraft utterly incapacitated, its operational life seemingly brought to an abrupt and violent end. Upon closer scrutiny, the full gravity of the damage became disturbingly apparent, revealing an even more pervasive destruction than the initial, distant observations had hinted at. The intricate details of the impact zones, the precise nature of the perforations, and the systemic compromise of various sections unfolded before the engineer's eyes, confirming that the initial assessment had, in fact, underestimated the true extent of the aerial battering. This proximity allowed for a grim appreciation of the sheer volume of material that had been torn, bent, or blown away. The robust engine cowling, designed to protect the powerful radial engine, now bore a striking resemblance to a coarse sieve, its metallic skin riddled with a multitude of jagged, irregular holes. These gaping apertures offered an unsettling glimpse into the complex machinery within, starkly exposing the gleaming cylinder banks that lay beneath, normally concealed and shielded from view. The integrity of this protective shell had been utterly compromised, yet, remarkably, the engine itself remained largely in place. The aircraft's wings, crucial for lift and stability, also displayed significant and unequivocally visible damage. Numerous perforations marred their surfaces, some of these apertures being astonishingly large, capacious enough to easily accommodate a human fist. This level of penetration indicated not mere superficial nicks, but substantial breaches that would typically disrupt airflow and compromise the structural integrity of the wing box itself. Yet the overall structure appeared to hold. The fabric covering of the tail section, once taut and aerodynamic, now hung in forlorn tatters, where it had not been entirely ripped away by the force of the impacts. Despite this visually catastrophic appearance, as the engineers embarked upon their systematic and painstaking examination of each component, they were repeatedly confronted with a perplexing and almost bewildering reality. While numerous critical systems had undeniably sustained significant damage, they had, against all odds, not been utterly annihilated. This recurring observation began to solidify a new understanding of the P-47's inherent resilience, hinting at a design philosophy focused on damage tolerance rather than absolute invulnerability. It was during the comprehensive inspection of the formidable engine that the team encountered their initial and most profound surprise. Given the external appearance of the cowling and the general ferocity of the attack, expectations were low, anticipating a completely ruined power plant. However, what they discovered challenged all preconceived notions about engine vulnerability in combat. Indeed, the evidence was clear. Multiple individual cylinders, vital components for power generation, had been directly struck by the incoming rounds. The metallic surfaces of these critical elements bore the unmistakable scars of high-velocity impacts, indicating a significant compromise to their individual functioning. Furthermore, the delicate cooling fins, essential for dissipating heat, were extensively fractured, and various ancillary accessory components, crucial for the engine's operation, lay shattered and fragmented. Yet, in a testament to its formidable engineering, the colossal engine block itself, that massive, inherently robust crankcase forming the very heart and structural core of the prodigious R-2800 power plant, had miraculously maintained its integrity, resisting catastrophic failure despite the surrounding destruction. This central piece of machinery was still whole. This unexpected survival immediately illuminated a critical design advantage for the German engineers: the inherent protection afforded by the sheer physical bulk and distributed nature of the radial engine. With its impressive configuration of 18 cylinders meticulously arranged in two concentric rows, the loss of even 2 or 3 individual cylinders to enemy fire would still leave a substantial complement of 15 functioning cylinders. This intrinsic redundancy meant that while the engine's performance would undoubtedly be degraded, it would very likely continue to operate, albeit at a reduced capacity, enabling the pilot a chance to return to base. Consequently, the engine, though potentially operating with a noticeable roughness and a substantial diminution in its overall power output, would nevertheless persist in its fundamental function of generating thrust. This capability, to remain operational despite significant battle damage, represented a profound tactical advantage, offering a lifeline to pilots who might otherwise face immediate, irreversible engine failure in a single-engine aircraft. In stark contrast, a liquid-cooled, inline engine, such as the DB605 found within the formidable BF109, possessed no comparable inherent redundancy. Its more compact and integrated design meant that damage to any single cylinder typically initiated a cascading failure, leading inevitably to a rapid loss of coolant. This, in turn, would quickly escalate to severe overheating and the almost instantaneous seizure of the engine within a mere matter of minutes, offering no margin for error or sustained flight. Indeed, even a minor perforation to a cylinder in such a design typically precipitated a swift and unrecoverable loss of vital coolant. This critical fluid depletion invariably led to an accelerated and severe overheating of the engine, culminating in a complete and irreversible mechanical seizure within an alarmingly short span of minutes, effectively condemning the aircraft and its pilot. Even more critically, the P-47's intricate oil system, indispensable for the lubrication and cooling of its powerful engine, had demonstrated a remarkably robust capacity for survival. This was a particularly astonishing finding, given the vulnerability of such systems to fragmentation and direct hits. Its ability to maintain functionality under duress was a key factor in the aircraft's overall resilience. While it was evident that numerous oil lines, conduits for the vital lubricant, had been completely severed, and the main oil tank itself bore the clear marks of several penetrations, the system as a whole had not failed catastrophically. The damage, though significant, had not rendered the entire oil supply inert. Crucially, the P-47's oil system was designed with ample capacity and built-in redundancy, ensuring that even in the event of substantial leakage, a sufficient volume of oil would persist to maintain critical engine lubrication for the vital minutes required. This precious window of operational time could mean the difference between an emergency landing in hostile territory and a safe return to friendly airfields, a stark contrast to other designs. In contrast, German fighter aircraft typically incorporated much smaller oil reservoirs, which were often strategically positioned in areas highly susceptible to enemy fire. This design choice, likely driven by weight considerations, inherently increased their vulnerability to combat damage. Consequently, a solitary 20 mm round impacting the oil system of a Bf-109 was, in practical terms, tantamount to an immediate and irreversible death sentence for its engine. Such a hit would rapidly deplete the limited oil supply, leading to rapid overheating and mechanical failure, offering the pilot virtually no chance of recovery or escape. Perhaps the most astonishing and impactful discovery made during the exhaustive post-firing assessment was related to the aircraft's fuel tanks. The findings here were nothing short of revolutionary, highlighting a technological advantage that fundamentally shifted the odds of pilot survival in aerial combat. The P-47 self-sealing fuel tanks were far from a simplistic application of a rubberized coating. Instead, they represented a highly sophisticated, multi-layered engineering marvel. Their construction began with a conventional outer layer of aluminum, meticulously shaped to define the tank's form and impart essential structural rigidity. Beneath this robust metallic skin lay a crucial layer of vulcanized rubber, providing initial protection and resilience. Directly adjacent to this was a layer of untreated, raw rubber, which directly interfaced with the internal fuel supply, forming the core of its ingenious self-sealing mechanism. The genius of this design became evident upon penetration. When a bullet or shell fragment inevitably pierced these layers, the aviation fuel, upon contact with the untreated rubber, initiated a rapid chemical reaction. This interaction caused the untreated rubber layers to swell and dramatically expand, physically constricting and ultimately sealing the breach within a remarkably swift timeframe of mere seconds. This immediate response was critical in preventing catastrophic fuel loss and potential ignition. While the German engineers possessed prior familiarity with self-sealing fuel tank technology, having observed its application in certain British aircraft, the American implementation proved to be demonstrably superior and significantly more robust. The P-47 system exhibited an enhanced capability, adept at effectively sealing not only larger diameter perforations, but also demonstrating an impressive resilience against multiple, successive penetrations, a level of performance that surpassed existing designs. The live-fire test itself had inflicted approximately a dozen distinct 20 mm caliber holes across various fuel tanks within the P-47's airframe. The astonishing outcome was that every single one of these breaches had either fully sealed itself or was in the advanced stages of sealing. While an initial expulsion of fuel was observed immediately after impact, this leakage had rapidly ceased entirely or diminished to an inconsequential, negligible drip, preventing any significant loss of vital fuel. Of even greater strategic importance, the meticulously engineered internal structure of the fuel tanks, incorporating both internal baffles and specialized foam filling in certain reservoirs, had effectively mitigated the risk of explosive fuel vaporization. This meant that even high-explosive rounds, designed for maximum destructive effect, were unable to generate a sufficient concentration of fuel mist within the tank to trigger an ignition. Consequently, an Allied pilot, while perhaps enduring the loss of 20 or 30 gallons of precious fuel due to combat damage, would invariably avoid the far more devastating fate of losing his life to a catastrophic, in-flight fire, a common cause of loss for other aircraft. The examination of the aircraft's intricate control system unveiled an equally compelling and revelatory narrative of resilience. Despite the brutal impacts, multiple critical control cables, essential for transmitting pilot inputs to the flight surfaces, had been completely severed. This specific type of damage, under conventional aircraft design principles, should have unequivocally rendered the aircraft utterly uncontrollable, leaving the pilot at the mercy of aerodynamic forces. However, the P-47's design ingeniously incorporated dual, and in some critical instances, even triple redundant control runs. For example, the ailerons, responsible for roll control, were actuated by two entirely separate cable systems, each routed through distinct and physically separated sections of the wing structure. Similarly, both the elevator, controlling pitch, and the rudder governing yaw were equipped with both primary and robust backup control mechanisms. This extensive redundancy meant that even with several cables entirely severed, at least one critical control path invariably remained functional. While the controls might become noticeably stiffer or less immediately responsive, demanding greater physical exertion and finesse from the pilot, they would nevertheless remain operational. A battle-damaged P-47, though undoubtedly presenting a challenging and arduous flying experience, would crucially remain flyable, offering a fighting chance for return. Even the intricate electrical system of the P-47 exhibited a remarkably thoughtful and comprehensive approach to redundancy. The aircraft was equipped with multiple independent generators and several distinct battery systems, augmented by strategically placed circuit breakers specifically engineered to isolate and contain damage within affected sections. This contrasted sharply with a Bf-109, where electrical damage frequently resulted in an instantaneous and complete loss of all electrical power, plunging the cockpit into darkness and silencing vital communications. In stark opposition, the P-47 possessed the remarkable capability to sustain the loss of as much as half of its entire electrical system, and yet still maintain a reliable power supply to its most critical flight instruments and essential radio communication equipment, preserving vital functions for pilot safety. The dedicated team of engineers meticulously documented every facet of the damage, diligently taking precise measurements, capturing numerous photographic records, and carefully collecting samples of materials for subsequent, in-depth laboratory analysis. Their preliminary conclusion, emerging from this wealth of evidence, was both unavoidable in its certainty and profoundly humbling in its implications. The Americans had conceived and constructed an aircraft that was, from the very first rivet hammered into place, fundamentally engineered to endure and survive the rigors of combat damage. This extraordinary resilience was not merely a stroke of luck, nor was it solely attributable to inherently superior materials. Rather, it was the direct outcome of a systematic and deeply ingrained design philosophy. This guiding principle unequivocally prioritized pilot survival and the potential for aircraft recovery above all else, even over traditional metrics such as minimizing weight or maximizing raw performance. The stark difference became clear. While German designers had focused their efforts on crafting agile fighters optimized for winning individual dogfights, their American counterparts had been strategically building robust machines specifically designed to reliably bring their invaluable pilots safely home from the perilous skies. The comprehensive technical report, diligently compiled by the expert engineers at the Rechlin facility, ultimately spanned dozens of meticulously detailed pages. However, its most critical and damning findings could be distilled into a singular, unequivocal sentence. The prevailing German fighter design philosophy had proven to be fundamentally flawed and ill-suited for the protracted and attrition-heavy nature of the war they were currently engaged in. While the official document, typical of military bureaucratic prose, refrained from such blunt and direct language, the profound implications were undeniably clear to any discerning reader capable of interpreting the nuances between the lines. The P-47, through its very existence and demonstrated capabilities, presented a radically divergent approach to aerial combat, one that consciously embraced certain compromises, particularly in terms of raw agility or speed, in exchange for overwhelmingly superior advantages in pilot survivability and enduring operational robustness. A detailed analysis of the P-47's armor configuration further unveiled a profound level of strategic foresight and meticulous consideration regarding potential bullet trajectories and probabilities of impact. It became evident that American designers had not simply affixed steel plates haphazardly onto the airframe. Instead, they had undertaken extensive studies to determine the most probable angles from which enemy fire would emanate during typical combat engagements, positioning protective armor accordingly. The substantial seatback armor, for instance, was specifically engineered to safeguard the pilot against the most prevalent attack vector, from directly behind and slightly above. Concurrently, the robust windscreen armor offered crucial protection against perilous head-on assaults and effectively deflected dangerous fragments resulting from engine impacts. Even the thickness of the armor plating was intelligently varied, precisely calibrated according to the perceived threat probability, reflecting a highly efficient use of protective materials. Highly critical areas were shielded by formidable quarter-inch plate, whereas less vulnerable sections received lighter, yet still effective, protection. While German aircraft also incorporated armor, it was typically minimal, often appearing to be an afterthought rather than an integral and meticulously planned component of the initial design. The ingenious technology embedded within the P-47 self-sealing fuel tanks captivated the minds of German chemists and engineers alike. They painstakingly dissected sample sections of the tanks, subjecting the intricate rubber compounds to rigorous analysis under controlled laboratory conditions. Their investigations confirmed that the system's efficacy hinged upon a highly specific and rapid chemical reaction occurring between the aviation fuel and the untreated rubber layers. Upon contact, the fuel initiated a swift and dramatic swelling of the rubber, causing it to expand to several times its original volume. This rapid expansion effectively created a resilient plug, capable of sealing perforations up to approximately 12 mm in diameter. While larger breaches might not achieve complete, airtight sealing, the system would still significantly restrict fuel flow, preventing catastrophic loss. Although the Germans possessed analogous self-sealing technology, their practical implementation was demonstrably inferior. Their own self-sealing tanks frequently failed after sustaining multiple hits, whereas the American tanks exhibited an unparalleled capacity to endure numerous penetrations and remarkably continue to function, preserving critical fuel reserves. The overarching philosophy of redundancy, a core tenet of the P-47's design, permeated virtually every critical system throughout the aircraft. This concept, however, proved to be perhaps the most challenging for German engineers to fully comprehend and appreciate within their own strategic framework. From their perspective, redundancy invariably translated into additional weight, increased mechanical complexity, higher manufacturing costs, and a greater burden on maintenance resources. Within the strained confines of the German military-industrial system, already severely stretched and operating under immense pressure due to a multi-front global conflict, such an apparent inefficiency in design seemed not only counterintuitive but almost flagrantly wasteful, a luxury they simply could not afford. The American strategic calculus, however, diverged dramatically. The United States possessed an unparalleled industrial capacity, vast reserves of raw materials, and a deeply ingrained strategic philosophy that unequivocally regarded its highly trained pilots as utterly irreplaceable assets. From this perspective, the construction of a heavier, more expensive fighter aircraft that consistently and reliably ensured the safe return of its pilots was deemed a far superior long-term investment than the production of lighter, ostensibly cheaper fighters that invariably led to significantly higher pilot casualties. The detailed calculations presented within the Rechlin report underscored this point, focusing on overall combat effectiveness. While a Bf-109 might indeed boast superior maneuverability and a more advantageous power-to-weight ratio, if it carried a 30% probability of being destroyed by damage that a P-47 would demonstrably survive, then the American aircraft emerged as the ultimately more effective war machine. The immense investment in pilot training, spanning many months and incurring costs far exceeding that of any single aircraft, was a critical factor. Furthermore, experienced pilots, through their accumulation of invaluable combat knowledge and tactical acumen, became exponentially more valuable over time. The Americans grasped this profound calculus with absolute clarity. While the German command undoubtedly understood the principle, the severe limitations of their industrial capacity and resource availability simply precluded them from implementing the robust and resilient American solution. The indigenous industrial capacity of their nation proved wholly inadequate to implement or even replicate the formidable American engineering solutions. A particularly insightful segment of the comprehensive report delved into a subject that would have been deemed almost sacrilegious to address openly within official Luftwaffe communications: the intricate realm of pilot psychology and the delicate state of morale amongst combat aviators. The astute engineers meticulously observed that American pilots, possessing an unwavering conviction in their aircraft's exceptional ability to endure colossal punishment and still facilitate their safe return to base, would predictably prosecute their aerial assaults with heightened aggression and demonstrate a significantly reduced inclination to disengage from confrontational encounters. In stark contrast, their German counterparts, flying inherently more fragile interceptors, would inevitably cultivate a pronounced sense of circumspection, leading them to prematurely discontinue offensive maneuvers and exhibit a greater propensity to circumvent disadvantageous combat scenarios. This profound psychological dynamic, therefore, exponentially amplified the P-47 Thunderbolt's inherent material and structural benefits. The aircraft was not merely engineered with a superior capacity for battle endurance. It also forged a formidable psychological edge, rendering American airmen exceptionally formidable adversaries in the unforgiving theater of aerial combat. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The exceptional caliber of its manufacturing processes also garnered considerable attention and detailed analysis within the report. The P-47 was fabricated adhering to mass production benchmarks that German industrial facilities in 1943 were simply incapable of replicating. Each rivet application exhibited remarkable uniformity and exacting precision, a testament to the meticulous assembly. Welded joints consistently demonstrated an unvarying standard of excellence, signifying robust construction. Furthermore, individual components possessed a complete interchangeability across different airframes, a logistical convenience considered an almost fantastical luxury by German ground crews, who were accustomed to the laborious practice of custom-fitting parts and improvising makeshift remedies due to inconsistent manufacturing tolerances. Such unparalleled manufacturing sophistication implied that even aircraft sustaining significant damage in combat could be rapidly returned to operational status through the facile replacement of standardized components. Conversely, their German counterparts frequently necessitated bespoke fabrication for repair work, a process that invariably consumed precious time and highly skilled labor, both resources becoming progressively rarer and more critical to the war effort. The Rechlin report culminated in a series of recommendations that, while eminently sensible in theory, were utterly unfeasible in practice given Germany's strategic position. It proposed that the Luftwaffe should implement duplicate flight control mechanisms, significantly enhance the efficacy of self-sealing fuel tank designs, augment protective armor plating, and fundamentally re-engineer fighter aircraft with an emphasis on survivability as a paramount design objective, rather than a subordinate afterthought. However, the actualization of these proposed improvements would necessitate extensive retooling of manufacturing facilities, a complete overhaul of aircraft designs from their foundational blueprints, and a significant reallocation of precious resources away from ongoing production efforts, which were already strained. The German war machine simply lacked the requisite temporal latitude, raw materials, or comprehensive industrial might to emulate the American paradigm. Their sole recourse was to meticulously record the insights gleaned and harbor a slender hope that piecemeal advancements might incrementally bridge the widening disparity. Consequently, the document was officially stamped, designated as classified, and disseminated to the relevant technical departments, where it became one among a multitude of similar communiques chronicling the increasingly stark reality that Germany was steadily losing the overarching technological and industrial conflict. The profound implications of the Rechlin findings reverberated throughout the strategic planning echelons of the Luftwaffe with the disruptive force of a seismic tremor. For several months, fighter group leaders operating on the Western Front had harbored growing suspicions that their established combat methodologies were proving increasingly ineffectual when pitted against the robust American heavy fighters. Yet, mere conjecture and irrefutable, documented evidence represented fundamentally distinct categories. Now, however, they possess concrete engineering data that substantiated the recurring observations and experiences of their combat aviators. It became unequivocally clear that engaging P-47s using conventional attack protocols constituted not only a profligate expenditure of ordnance, but, far more gravely, an unacceptable squandering of precious pilot lives. The imperative for the Luftwaffe to devise and implement novel tactical approaches was immediate and undeniable. The first tactical adjustment mandated was undoubtedly the most psychologically arduous to accept and implement. German pilots were admonished to eschew protracted aerial contests with P-47s whenever circumstances permitted. This directive fundamentally contravened every deeply ingrained instinct and principle instilled in fighter pilots through extensive training and doctrine. Traditional air combat philosophy rigorously championed relentless aggression, decisive offensive maneuvers, and the absolute obliteration of the adversary. Nevertheless, The compelling evidence from the Rechlin analysis demonstrated that a pilot flying a Bf-109 or FW-190 could expend their entire complement of ammunition into a Thunderbolt and still fail to achieve a definitive kill. Concurrently, that very same Thunderbolt, even having sustained damage, possessed the capacity to effortlessly annihilate the German fighter with a solitary, accurately placed volley from its formidable .50 caliber machine guns. The underlying statistical reality was starkly unambiguous. Exchanging fire with P-47s represented an inherently disadvantageous endeavor. Instead, German tactical documents began to underscore specialized attack methodologies, meticulously crafted to optimize the probability of inflicting irreparable damage. Pilots were specifically instructed to direct their ordnance solely towards the cockpit, if feasible, identified as the singular vulnerability where a solitary impact could ensure destruction irrespective of the aircraft's overall robustness. This, however, was a directive far simpler to mentally grasp than to practically implement. The cockpit, being a diminutive target on a rapidly maneuvering airframe, presented immense challenges, exacerbated by American pilots' disciplined training to continually execute evasive weaving maneuvers, rendering accurate targeting almost insurmountable. Nevertheless, this strategy was deemed superior to squandering valuable ammunition on impacts to wings and fuselage sections, which the P-47 was demonstrably capable of absorbing without critical failure. A further tactical recommendation involved initiating assaults from a direct frontal aspect, executing head-on passes. This particular maneuver achieved a dual strategic objective. Firstly, it presented the German pilot with a simultaneous opportunity to strike both the cockpit and the engine assembly, areas critical for aircraft function. Secondly, it effectively negated the P-47's inherent superiority in defensive firepower. The Thunderbolt's formidable array of weaponry was exclusively wing-mounted, necessitating their convergence at a predetermined distance, commonly around 300 yards. Consequently, at either closer proximity or greater separation, the projectile dispersion pattern became less focused. A head-on engagement transpired with such extreme rapidity that both opposing pilots were afforded merely a fleeting fraction of a second to discharge their weapons. In this instantaneous geometric confrontation, the German aircraft's centrally mounted cannons conferred a marginal but critical advantage in terms of concentrated fire. Of course, head-on attacks were inherently terrifying, immensely taxing on one's psychological fortitude, and demanded an almost preternatural level of courage. With aircraft hurtling towards one another at a combined velocity exceeding 600 miles per hour, each pilot was propelled into a high-stakes game of chicken, neither prepared to be the first to yield. It was, therefore, a profound trial of sheer bravery, as much as it was an assessment of piloting proficiency. Some commanders, recognizing the futility of direct engagement, proposed a strategy of entirely disregarding the P-47s and instead concentrating all efforts on the bomber formations they were tasked to protect. Indeed, the foundational objective of the Luftwaffe remained the destruction of the formidable American heavy bombers, which were relentlessly and systematically dismantling Germany's industrial infrastructure. The rationale posited that if the P-47s proved excessively challenging to neutralize effectively, a more judicious approach might involve acknowledging their presence, employing numerical superiority to decoy them away from the bomber streams, and then striking the vulnerable B-17s and B-24s while their protective escorts were tactically displaced and out of position. This gambit yielded sporadic successes, but American fighter doctrines rapidly adapted to counteract its effectiveness. Consequently, P-47 units commenced implementing layered escort formations, wherein a contingent of fighters maintained close proximity to the bombers, acting as a dedicated close escort, while others executed independent hunting patrols across varying altitudes, poised to intercept and engage any German interceptors that manifested, thus providing a flexible and robust defensive screen. The profound psychological repercussions stemming from the P-47's extraordinary resilience transcended mere tactical considerations and began to deeply affect the German aircrews. The morale of German pilots plummeted as they confronted the disheartening reality that they could meticulously execute every aspect of an engagement, attaining an optimal attack vector, scoring numerous direct hits, witnessing their ordnance impact its target, only to observe the American fighter depart the scene, perhaps emitting trails of smoke, yet fundamentally operational and continuing its mission. This engendered a pervasive sensation of futility, a gnawing conviction that the adversary possessed technological superiorities that neither individual piloting prowess nor sheer valor could adequately surmount in combat. This phenomenon proved especially soul-crushing for veteran aviators, who had meticulously forged their professional reputations upon exceptional gunnery skills and sophisticated tactical acumen. Having dedicated years to perfecting their intricate craft, they now faced the disconcerting realization that such hard-won mastery appeared woefully inadequate when confronted by the advanced principles of American aeronautical engineering and its embodiment in the P-47. Concurrently, maintenance and logistics officers derived distinct inferences from the comprehensive Rechlin assessment. Their analysis indicated that if P-47s were consistently managing to return to their airfields despite sustaining damage that would have unequivocally doomed German fighters, then American ground crews were necessarily dedicating immense resources and labor to repairing existing aircraft rather than focusing on the more costly and time-consuming production of new ones. This observation, they theorized, hinted at a potential point of vulnerability within the extensive American logistical network. Consequently, if the Luftwaffe succeeded in inflicting damage upon a greater number of P-47s than American repair facilities could expeditiously restore, they could, in essence, diminish the adversary's operational strength without necessarily securing outright aerial victories. This perspective instigated a nuanced reorientation in mission planning objectives. On occasion, mission accomplishment was recalibrated, no longer solely equating to aerial destruction, but encompassing the objective of rendering an aircraft sufficiently damaged to be incapacitated for a period of several days, thereby reducing the enemy's effective combat strength. By early 1944, Luftwaffe commanders had arrived at a profound comprehension that they were engaged in hostilities against an adversary whose foundational industrial ethos diverged radically from their own, and that this fundamental divergence was visibly materializing in a level of combat efficacy that could not be adequately addressed by tactical adjustments in isolation. The P-47 Thunderbolt's extraordinary resilience and performance during the rigorous evaluations at Rechlin transcended the status of a mere intriguing addendum within Luftwaffe intelligence dossiers. Instead, it signified a pivotal moment in the evolution of military aviation, fundamentally altering the discourse surrounding the core principles of aircraft design prioritization. Subsequent to the cessation of hostilities, it would become demonstrably evident that the critical insights gleaned from that remarkably resilient, bullet-scarred aircraft exerted a profound influence on the trajectory of fighter aircraft development across both emerging factions of what would later be known as the Cold War. The strategic principle of engineering aircraft for paramount survivability, as opposed to merely prioritizing exceptional maneuverability, transitioned from a debated concept into an established, undisputed doctrine that shaped generations of aerial combat platforms. American aircraft designers diligently absorbed the P-47's exemplary combat performance data and subsequently refined these principles to an even greater degree. The Republic F-84 Thunderjet, conceived and developed during the twilight years of the 1940s, demonstrably inherited the fundamental design ethos of its progenitor, the Thunderbolt, characterized by robust construction, formidable speed, and an inherent capacity to withstand severe battle damage. This enduring design philosophy transcended the realm of pure interceptors, extending its influence into specialized attack aircraft, exemplified by the iconic A-10 Thunderbolt II. Unveiled in the 1970s, and remaining a formidable presence in contemporary aerial operations, the A-10 essentially represented the P-47's core concept extrapolated to its ultimate, most comprehensive realization. Its features included duplicated flight control systems, a heavily armored cockpit, sophisticated self-sealing fuel tanks, engines strategically positioned to offer mutual protection against ground-based ordnance, and the astonishing capacity to return to base even after sustaining damage that obliterated half its airframe. The very existence of such a resilient platform is a direct testament to the P-47's pioneering validation of this operational design philosophy. On the other side of the nascent ideological divide, Soviet aircraft designers meticulously examined captured German intelligence analyses pertaining to Allied aircraft, among which the critical Rechlin findings were prominent. Consequently, subsequent Soviet fighter aircraft designs developed in the post-war era exhibited a discernible and growing emphasis on enhanced pilot protection and the incorporation of redundant operational systems. This robust design philosophy found tangible expression in aircraft such as the Su-25, widely recognized as the Soviet counterpart to the A-10, which integrated a multitude of identical survivability characteristics, demonstrating a global adoption of the lessons first illuminated by the P-47 at Rechlin. The enduring conflicts of the Cold War era, ranging from the Korean Peninsula to the jungles of Vietnam and the rugged terrain of Afghanistan, offered unceasing confirmation that aerial platforms engineered with the primary objective of ensuring pilot return were unequivocally justified, despite any associated structural burdens. These proxy skirmishes consistently demonstrated the intrinsic value of designing aircraft with a robust capacity to withstand damage, proving that the additional mass and complexity required for such features were a worthwhile investment in the preservation of human life and operational continuity. Even the German High Command, albeit at a juncture where their impact was largely negligible, eventually assimilated this crucial insight regarding aircraft survivability. Late war designs, exemplified by the formidable Ta-152, began to manifest a heightened focus on aspects like aviator protection and the resilience of fuel systems. Furthermore, their advanced jet aircraft programs, most notably the groundbreaking Mi-262, saw the integration of self-sealing fuel tanks and enhanced armor as integral components from the outset, rather than belated additions. However, by the time these critical improvements were incorporated into operational aircraft, Germany was critically deficient in petroleum resources, experienced aviators, and the requisite manufacturing capability to leverage them effectively. The Luftwaffe, which had once been at the vanguard of developing contemporary aerial combat strategies, ultimately found itself utterly outmatched by adversaries who had mastered both sophisticated tactical execution and prodigious industrial production. The profound human toll inherent in these engineering decisions became unmistakably evident when scrutinizing pilot attrition figures. American fighter pilot casualty rates in the European theater, while certainly not insignificant, were considerably reduced compared to German rates, particularly during the war's terminal phase. While a portion of this divergence stemmed from the numerical superiority of Allied forces and their superior training regimens, a major contributing factor was undeniably the simple, yet profound, concept of aircraft survivability. American aviators frequently emerged relatively unscathed from aerial mishaps and combat damage that would have proven fatal for their German counterparts. A P-47, for instance, could be riddled with perforations and still manage to traverse the English Channel, bringing its pilot home. Conversely, a Bf-109 sustaining similar damage would inevitably compel its aviator to parachute over enemy territory, leading to capture at best, or often a far worse fate. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The enduring influence of this design philosophy transcends the confines of purely military applications. Modern commercial aviation's unwavering commitment to fail-safes, its meticulous integration of multiple backup systems for every critical function, finds its foundational principles in the very same engineering mindset that brought forth the P-47. The Boeing 747's quartet of engines, the triple redundant hydraulic systems commonplace in contemporary airliners, and the elaborate fire suppression systems meticulously installed, all collectively underscore the profound realization that the paramount goal of safely bringing people home justifies the acceptance of additional mass, intricate design, and heightened expenditure. The actual P-47 subjected to testing at the Rechlin facility in all probability did not endure past the war. Historical accounts indicate that the majority of captured aircraft at that installation were either obliterated amidst the aerial bombardments by Allied forces or intentionally dismantled by retreating German units to preclude their recovery by enemy hands. Nevertheless, the aircraft's profound impact persisted in the minds of every engineer and aviator who meticulously studied those test results. They had observed conclusive evidence that an aircraft could indeed be designed to withstand damage deemed impossible to endure, challenging previous assumptions. This irrefutable demonstration fundamentally altered the prevailing approach to fighter aircraft construction, ushering in a new era of design priorities. Today, the survivability of military aircraft stands as a foremost engineering imperative, integrated from the earliest phases of ideation and development, never relegated to a secondary consideration. While specific methodologies have evolved, incorporating stealth technology, sophisticated electronic countermeasures, and advanced materials, the fundamental tenet endures unaltered. The most effective aircraft is ultimately the one that brings its pilot safely back to base. The P-47 Thunderbolt, sitting steadfastly in that German test range, absorbing repeated 20mm cannon fire, and stubbornly refusing to be incapacitated, validated that axiom with unparalleled clarity and immediacy. German engineers had initially endeavored to comprehend the reasons behind the remarkable resilience of these American fighters. They received their answer, meticulously recorded their findings, and in doing so, contributed significantly to formulating the foundational design parameters for every combat aircraft that followed. The test was originally intended to uncover vulnerabilities. Instead, it unveiled a transformative shift in aviation design philosophy that would transcend the immediate conflict, endure beyond the geopolitical tensions of the Cold War, and persist in shaping aircraft design into the 21st century.